Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by Snickers. Rookie mistake, maybe you just need a Snickers. I'm Jamie, that's Dave, that's Heath. We're taking a look at the waiver wire options for you at quarterback and running back, and some interesting decisions you might have to make. Remember, the injuries at quarterback are certainly worth keeping an eye on. Tua Tagovailoa in the concussion protocol. Jalen Hurts, is he going to return from the shoulder injury? And obviously Lamar Jackson, can he come back from the knee injury? So you might have to make some moves, and we have a couple of options here for you. Not a big list because you're in the fantasy championship at this point. Hopefully you're not searching for guys like Baker Mayfield or Teddy Bridgewater or those type of quarterbacks, but these are three that still could be available and probably have the best chance to help you. So you got Mike White at 45% rostered. He's now starting for the Jets again at Seattle. Gardner Minshew still could start, and he would be the preferred option, but again, with the Jalen Hurts potential move coming back, if you have to prioritize these two guys, take the one that you know is starting in Mike White. And then Brock Purdy's been very solid as the 49ers quarterback, taking on a very good matchup against the Las Vegas Raiders. So let's talk about Mike White again. So when we look at the situation for him, he hasn't exactly been the best fantasy quarterback. Only one game above 16 fantasy points. But as Heath alluded to, you see what he's averaging, 317 passing yards per game, Dave. Can he have a big game against the Seahawks defense that's kind of been shaky against quarterbacks, but not giving up a lot of big games?
In the last 7 weeks, they've allowed 5 quarterbacks to hit at least 20 fantasy points. So they are not a shutdown defense by any stretch of the imagination. And this Jets offense can actually look functional, move the football, get first downs, get in the red zone with Mike White. The one thing that's been missing is touchdowns. He had one that was dropped in a huge game against Minnesota. That would have given him over 20 fantasy points in that game. He can get there again. He's got the most upside of anybody that you'll find on the waiver wire, other than Gardner Minshew at quarterback.
Yeah, I think it's all going to come down to how many touchdowns he has. If he has 1, then he's probably going to be in that 18-point range. And if he gets to 2, then he's going to have a great day, similar to what Minshew did against the Cowboys. Now, he's had a couple of games with 0 touchdowns, and that's a possibility. They could score on the ground. But I like him. Like I said earlier that he was my clear number 2. There's actually not that big a gap between him and Purdy. But all 3 of those guys, top 15 options for me.
Do you fear a little bit that this could be a game where the Jets' run game actually gets going? Because that's what's been the Achilles heel for the Seattle defense, has been stopping the run.
A little bit, but I still think there's a possibility if the Jets' run game gets going, they're going to score more points, and he's going to have more opportunities to get in the end zone. I think if their run game is what it was last week, then that might be a point where he throws the ball 45 times for 300 yards, but doesn't get the 2 touchdowns.
It's easy to say that the rush offense for the Jets has been bad.
Yes,
but it's kind of coincided with him not being there too. You
right.
know, Zonovan Knight took off.
He had some good games with them.
When it was
with
him
Mike
as
White.
opposed
yeah,
to Zach
but he was
Wilson.
also catching passes from Mike White in those games too, and that's helped out a little bit. I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm supremely confident in Mike White, but if you're watching this and you're streaming quarterbacks, you're looking for somebody like this that's got some upside to get you north of 20 fantasy points. He's got a great shot.
All right, so let's talk Minshew again, taking on the Saints here. Again, their numbers have been fantastic, but some of it's been competition. However, they have shut down quarterbacks. And so Minshew, 26 points, 3 turnovers. Can he have another big game to get back to 20-plus points again?
I don't think he's very likely to throw for 355 yards because I don't think the Saints are going to score enough points to make him do that. But I think he'll live somewhere in that 275-yard range. 2 touchdowns is where he's lived for most of his last 8 starts. Like, he's just been right in that range. I think you can count on 2 touchdowns. He probably doesn't turn it over 3 times. I think he's more in the 20 to 22, 23-point range than 26. Dave said he had him top 8. That's where I had him last week. He's 11 for me this week.
Yeah, it's a little closer to that for me, too. You're obviously very confident, though.
Well, I just look at this Saints defense, and who have they played? You've really talked about it. It was Deshaun Watson in the snow last week. It was Desmond Ritter's first start the week before that. And then before the bye, they did a great job against Tom Brady. Brady had a miracle finish in that game. He finished with over 20 fantasy points. Garoppolo had a bad game against them. I don't know what to make of this defense, but I know what to make of the Eagles' offense. And I think that they're going to continue to push the ball downfield. So I'm okay with Minshew this week as a starter.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think anybody that got to your championship with him, have him again. You're not dropping him to pick up Mike White.
No.
So that's the obvious thing. Or
and now
Brock
we're
Purdy.
saying all that, but we'd really like to see Jalen Hurts play if he's healthy and ready to go.
No. I just don't know. Like, unless they're saying he's 100% healthy and there's no risk of further injury, then yes, I'd love to see Jalen Hurts play. But they have don't risk Jalen Hurts at all.
They have one thing.
They need to win one more game.
They have one thing, though, that matters to them in this game. If they beat the Saints, they drop the Saints further back in terms of win-loss record, and it pushes up their draft pick. So it does help them.
I would bet on the Eagles straight up if they're starting Gardner Minshew over the Saints. Now, they're not as likely to win, but I think they're still the favorite with Minshew as the
for sure.
And they need to win to get the 1 seed. So
totally, yeah. But I mean, they could win one of their last 2 and still get the job done. Brock Purdy, again, has been very solid as the starting quarterback for the 49ers since Jimmy Garoppolo went down. He's actually averaging 20.5 fantasy points per game in those 4 starts. The Raiders on the season give up 20.9 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. So it's a nice little marriage there in case you want to buy into Brock Purdy. But it's a matter of, can you continue to get by with minimal pass attempts and living and dying without him turning the ball over? He did turn the ball over last week, but can he continue to have this type of production? Obviously, Dave, you're not as confident in this matchup against the Raiders as Heath and I are.
He'll move up for me, but I look at him as a high floor type of quarterback, and I do think that the Raiders' defense has played better. It's almost the same thing as the Saints, so look at who they played.
Yeah,
it's Kenny
much worse,
Pickett, it's Mac Jones, it's Baker Mayfield, and it's Justin Herbert, and we all know that Justin Herbert apparently isn't as great as he once was. I think Purdy can find you 18 fantasy points again. There are some quarterbacks that I do think have a much higher ceiling than Brock Purdy does.
Like who?
I think Sam Darnold does. I really do. Against Tampa Bay, that Bucs defense has given up a lot of fantasy points to quarterbacks not named Trace McSorley lately. I have taken a big step back on Teddy Bridgewater. HQ anchor Mike Hugno covers the Dolphins a little bit. And he told me that there's a chance that if Teddy Bridgewater doesn't get off to a good start, it could be Skylar Thompson time. And that immediately drops the floor for Teddy Bridgewater. So I'm going to go with Purdy over
I think the problem with Purdy is just, you mentioned it, it's the pass attempts. 21, 26, 22 pass attempts, and somehow he still has 2 passing touchdowns.
It's this offense.
Every single week.
It's the skill
It
players.
is, but he has a 7% touchdown rate. Even the other quarterbacks who have played in this offense have not produced touchdowns at a rate that he has. If Patrick Mahomes had a 7% touchdown rate, we'd say he's going to regress. He's not going to keep this up. So it's one of these days he's going to burn you with these low pass attempts.
And this is a Raiders offense
Totally.
that's going to look like a mess against this defense.
But every offense looked like a mess
Yes,
against this team, and
that's
he
true.
still had plenty of production. So it's still buying into what he's doing. Like, to me,
Right.
he's as safe as they come and still going to get you in that 20-point range. So I would trust him over Darnold for sure. The Bucs numbers, I think, that you keep referencing the last 2 games, I don't think they jive as much with what. I mean, one of those was Joe Burrow. So it's not like
Sure, that's true.
You could say that McSorley is not on one end, but one
Right.
of those is Joe Burrow, one of the best in the league. So I don't think
You
there's
don't
much
look
game.
at Darnold and Burrow the exact
No,
same
not
way?
at all. I don't look
No,
at
neither
Darnold
do I.
as anything
I
to
just
trust.
think he's got a little bit of a higher ceiling than
I
Purdy.
don't see that against anybody, especially against that Bucs defense. Let's talk about the running backs here that you're. Oh, I'm sorry. Some super flex guys. Speaking of Sam Darnold, not on this list because he's a little bit. Well, for me, I don't trust him, so that's why I didn't put him on the list. But here are some guys that could be available to you, widely available to you that you're looking at. So for you, Bridgewater is not the one you're going to take a flyer on.
No, from this list?
Yes.
I think I would start my week with Carson Wentz at quarterback. From this list only, not from overall. And then if
No,
it
this
ends
is
up being that,
desperation, 2 quarterbacks. 2
okay,
super flex.
fine. And so if all these guys are on my waiver wire in that type of league, and I don't know why they would be, but if they were, Wentz would be the one I would start with. And then if it ends up being Heineke starting, I would pivot to Baker.
I'd go Teddy, then Wentz, then Sam Darnold would be third.
I'm going to trust Baker. I really
Yeah.
do. I think you just look at what he's done. He's been very comfortable in this offense. I think this Chargers defense is still a little bit overrated. I know they played well the last couple of weeks, but it was against a Dolphins team that was fractured, a Titans team that stinks, and a Colts team that
The
stinks.
last 2 weeks.
And so,
if
yes,
any.
I don't want to say the Rams are fixed by any stretch, but he looks good right now, and I'll buy into that. I also think Desmond Ridder's going to have a big game against the Cardinal defense, despite the fact that J.J. Watt is retiring. He's going to have a big game, his best game to date, because that Cardinals defense absolutely bad, and they just lost Buda Baker. Now let's talk about some running backs. Running backs looking at here. Not the sexiest list, but again, some guys that you might be able to turn to if you're stuck. The 2 at the top seem the most logical based on what they've done. Hubbard's been very productive, at least 9 PPR points in 3 straight games, coming off the big game last week. Zach Moss, again, as we told you at the top of the show, establishing himself as the guy there for the Colts. And then 2 potential replacement options, JaMychal Hasty for the Jaguars and Hassan Haskins for the Titans. If they decide to rest guys, those could be the starting running backs for their respective teams. Justin Jackson could be stepping in for Jamal Williams. So let's talk about Hubbard, Dave. What do you think about him as the second guy for Carolina, but has been productive really for the last 3 games?
It's almost like a 1A, 1B situation for him. He was the one that started getting some run early on against the Lions last week, and he's the one that plays when they're playing from behind. So I almost wonder if he's game script proof, where it's not going to be a situation where if the Panthers build a big lead on the Buccaneers, which sounded silly 2 weeks ago, but now might actually be realistic in the game. I think Hubbard's the one that fantasy managers would want to gravitate to off the waiver wire. He's in line for maybe 3 catches as well.
I would feel a lot better about him if Raheem Blackshear did not exist. I don't understand why he stole a touchdown last week. He was the only Panthers running back who saw a target last week. Like Chuba Hubbard needs to be the pass-catching back as well. He's a waiver wire ad for sure, but I do get just a little bit concerned that there's a 1A, there's a 1B, and then there's another guy that for some reason has to have 4 or 5 touches a game as well.
So based on what you said at the top of the show with Zach Moss, would you rather have Zach Moss or Chuba Hubbard?
I would right now take Moss over Hubbard. And I do think that there's a chance that Tampa Bay run defense shows up. I know the Panthers had a lot of success against them early, but I do think the Panthers or the Buccaneers win this game. And so I think there's some chance that Panthers run attack really runs into a wall this week.
And that's in PPR too. You would take Moss?
I would.
Okay.
I wouldn't. I would take Hubbard in PPR. I think I might take him in non-PPR as well. And this Panthers offense looks good. And listen, we could say it was against the Lions and they were missing a couple starters, but their run offense and the way that their line was getting off blocks or getting off the snap and just absolutely dominating the Lions, something to behold. It's going to be a tough game for Tampa.
Totally tough to overlook what they did against Detroit. Had come into that game 8 straight games, not allowing a running back over 10 PPR points, and they just made them look like they weren't even there. And as Dan Campbell said, you kicked our butts. Not that language exactly, but he was pretty complimentary of Steve Wilks after the game. Let's talk about the 2 guys that could be replacement options. So you got Hassan Haskins in Tennessee. Seems like the most logical guy to be playing more this week. JaMychal Hasty, however, could be in a similar situation that the Jaguars decide to sit their guys. In that scenario, Heath, which one would you like better?
If you told me Etienne was sitting out, I think I'd probably like Hasty better because I know he's going to catch passes. And I think that Haskins could have to share or may not see much in the passing game, although he has had 2 catches over the last 2 weeks.
He's been there passing downs back since Dontre Hilliard went down, but we know that's not necessarily a big role.
Right. And so, but I do think that if assuming that Etienne plays, I could see Haskins right in that Zach Moss role if there's no Derrick Henry. I think he could be a high-end flex. I just think Hasty has a little bit more upside. That's a better offense, more pass-catching opportunities.
It's a much better matchup.
Texans,
yeah,
right.
It's a much better matchup. The one game that we did see Hasty play, you mentioned his pass catching, was the Baltimore game when Etienne left early with the foot injury. He had 5 catches in that game, 12 carries. So they clearly leaned on him. The difference is, I think, I guess when you're looking at these guys, is just keep in mind, if they're pulling back Derrick Henry, it's not like they're leaving everybody else out there. And the same thing with Travis Etienne. Now, they may be a little bit more cautious with Etienne comparatively to Trevor Lawrence or the receivers because he's been battling through this foot injury, seems to be fine, but they could decide, okay, that's one guy we're going to rest as opposed to, let's say, Christian Kirk or Zay Jones.
Sure.
So it could just be a move that they make. So keep an eye on this. You might not have to pick them up Tuesday night, but Wednesday night, certainly Thursday night, if you want to go for Haskins, those might be some moves you want to make. Now, Justin Jackson's going to get a bigger opportunity if Jamal Williams does not play. Williams, prior to last week, averaging 15.5 touches per game, 14 rushing touchdowns on the season. Does he take that role, or is it more of a split between DeAndre Swift and Justin Jackson?
I'm going to guess that they split up the workload, the Jamal Williams workload between Swift and Jackson, and I think Swift's the one that'll get the nod inside the 10, inside the 5. At the 1, will he do it? Yeah, maybe he will at first, or maybe they mix and match between the 2 of them. I don't mind starting Swift this week as a low-end number 2 running back.
How do you view Jackson in a bigger role by comparison to Hubbard and Moss?
He's behind those guys, but I do think he's closer to Hubbard, right in that low-end number 3 running back range. I think there's significant upside because we've seen with DeAndre Swift times where we thought he was building towards something. Even last week when Jamal Williams left early, we saw, 5 touches for DeAndre Swift? It's possible that they just don't want to give him more than 10 to 12 touches, and we see a 15-touch role for Justin Jackson. So there's a little floor, but there's a bigger ceiling, I think, for him.
It just makes no sense, and Rick Spielman, former NFL general manager, does shows with us on Sunday on Fantasy Football Today. He said this 2 weeks ago, that the Lions have nothing to lose at this point. They're trying to make a playoff push. Play DeAndre Swift.
Yeah.
And they just don't do it. I just don't understand. They're desperate right now, so hopefully they play DeAndre Swift. If there is no Jamal Williams, could be a huge week for him against the Bears. At least that's what we're hoping for in the Fantasy Championship. All right, we're going to take a break right now. We come back, get into the wide receiver and tight end moves that you could be looking at. And one guy certainly on the rise is Jahan Dotson. But let's also not forget about a veteran that could reward you in Brandon Cooks. A couple receivers, among other players that we'll talk about next on FFT. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by Snickers. Rookie mistake, maybe you just need a Snickers. I'm Jamie, that's Dave, that's Heath. We're looking at the wide receiver and tight end waiver wire moves you should be making for a very important Week 17. Let's start with the wide receivers that you're looking to add, and it's a pretty big list because it's always a pretty big position that has a lot of options for you, and hopefully these guys will deliver for this week. So Jahan Dotson's been awesome for the last 3 weeks. Hopefully keeps it going for one more time. Brandon Cooks came back from his 3-game absence with the calf injury and looked very good against the Titans. Richie James and Isaiah Hodgins both playing well for the Giants. Iffy matchup against the Colts. We'll see if they can carry it over one more week. Romeo Doubs could be in a great spot if Christian Watson's out. Greg Dortch looked like Greg Dortch again. Rashid Shaheed could be in a good opportunity with potentially Chris Olave out, and maybe Elijah Moore, Mecole Hardman, and Russell Gage can help you as well. Let's talk about a few of these guys here. We'll start with Jahan Dotson. So, Dave, he's been on a nice roll. 3 games in a row with 16-plus PPR points. Not the easiest of matchups against the Browns in Week 17, but hard to overlook a player that's as hot as he is right now. Also have the quarterback situation up in the air. We don't know if it's going to be Carson Wentz or Taylor Heineke. Does that matter? And how much do you trust Dotson against the Browns?
The quarterback doesn't matter. We saw Dotson play well with Wentz earlier this year and with Heineke lately, and the matchup is tough. That's the bigger issue to me because that Browns defense just have not allowed a lot on deep passing to opposing wide receivers. But this guy's been red hot. He's only played 3 games in the last 4 weeks. He's still top 24 wide receiver in yards per target, yards per catch, explosive play rate, end zone targets. He's top 12. Obviously has 3 touchdowns in his last 3 games. He's got a big role in this Washington offense. I don't know how much they're necessarily going to have to throw in this game, but getting Dotson involved should be on their priority list. I like him as a top 30 type of wide receiver.
Definitely a guy who I keep ranking higher than where I've got projected because it's hard to project him very high in a game with an over-under of 42, playing against one of the worst run defenses in the league with a team that clearly wants to just run the ball. But really, it kind of looks like he's been in the number 1 over the last few weeks over Terry McLaurin. I almost want to just move him up a little bit more than I have to move McLaurin out of the top 25 because I agree with Dave. I don't know that there are even 30 pass attempts in this game if it goes the way they want it to.
Whoever they start at quarterback could tell you. I mean, if they want to throw the ball a little bit more, it could be Wentz. If they want to be a little bit more conservative, it could be Heineke. That was a big part of their success, was Heineke managing the game and running the ball. So we'll see how things go here against the Browns. Brandon Cooks, 9 targets last week, scored a touchdown, could have had 2 against the Titans, had 1 taken away by penalty. And so now he's back taking on a Jaguars defense that's looked much better of late, but again, could be resting some guys. So Heath, where's your confidence level in Brandon Cooks?
I actually currently have him slightly ahead of Jahan Dotson. He is a boom-bust number 3 wide receiver, also had a 33-yard touchdown called back in that game, and he's had some problems over this season with health. He's had some problems with being disgruntled with the team, but it does seem like he's looking to finish the season on a good note. Might be his last game in Houston, playing a Jacksonville defense not very good against pass catchers in the first place, and then may not have their full complement of players. I kind of like Cooks this week as a boom potential.
I like him as a number 3 receiver, but a low-end number 3 receiver. He came through ultimately with 13 PPR points last week. I wish it were a little bit more. Maybe he does get there if Jacksonville's resting their guys. This is a Texans offense. Even if the Jaguars do rest a bunch of their starters, I'm not sure how well they'll be able to run the football because they have so many just like average guys running it. So maybe they need to throw it a little bit more. And Cooks was good last week. Obviously, the numbers that got called back, I don't have a problem with him as a number 3 receiver.
I actually hope Jacksonville doesn't rest their starters because then there's probably a little bit more garbage time potential if they're chasing points to the level that they should be because Jacksonville's offense has been awesome. So I think Brandon Cooks is in line for a pretty good game. I'm excited about him. Haven't said that very much for the majority of the season. Giants have a 3-headed monster now at wide receiver where 2 guys coming off huge games in terms of Richie James and Isaiah Hodgins. And then you have Darius Slayton. All 3 of those guys had at least 11 PPR points against the Vikings last week. Now they're taking on a Colts team. The strength of their defense is their secondary. However, with the way that at least the 2 guys have performed, Richie James and Isaiah Hodgins, it's hard to necessarily get away from them if you're just looking at production. Hodgins has scored at least 15 PPR points 3 of the last 4 weeks. James has scored 13 or more PPR points in 4 of his last 6 games. And so can they be trusted against the Colts?
I think James can be more so than Hodgins in PPR. I don't know if I'm ready to trust either one of them in non-PPR. How much passing will the Giants have to do in this game? That Colts team, just on both sides of the ball, the defense is playing well. The offense stinks. Even the Giants defense should be able to kind of handle Indianapolis's offense, keep the scoring low. I think this is another week where Saquon Barkley goes crazy. If you're looking for 10 PPR points, I think James has a better chance to get you there than Hodgins.
Got Slayton and James both as low-end number 3 wide receivers. I do think that it helps him that this is probably a low pass volume game. You're going to need a deep shot. Slayton, the guy more likely to have the deep shot. So James right around wide receiver 36. Hodgins more of a number 4.
See, Slayton makes me nervous because that's probably where Gilmore goes the most. James in the slot, since they've lost Kenny Moore, they've been awful against slot receivers. Keenan Allen destroyed them. Obviously, Richie James is not Keenan Allen, but he's been their slot receiver, and again, he's been very productive for the majority of the last month. So I don't think he's a bad play if you are talking about PPR. Greg Dortch, Dave, you said on our podcast today that you're excited about him. He's coming off the best game for a Cardinals receiver in Week 16. It was with Trace McSorley. We don't know if Colt McCoy will return, but what's your outlook for Dortch moving forward?
If it's McSorley, he's going to panic when he has the ball. He's going to throw those short passes. It's easy targets. It's easy completions. It's easy PPR fantasy points. I don't mind going back to Dortch if it's going to be McSorley. If it's going to be Colt McCoy, then I'm a little bit more nervous because clearly McCoy can get the football to DeAndre Hopkins, and if he plays, Marquise Brown also could get some targets. So I'm not going to be as excited about Dortch if it's McCoy.
I just don't. I mean, he played 6 snaps the week before. I have very little confidence in what Greg Dortch's role is going to be, especially if Marquise Brown is 100%.
When he's been featured, forget about him. When this position has been featured, it's been awesome.
Right.
The first 3 games of the season, Dortch without Rondale Moore, 13 plus PPR points. You go back to San Francisco before he had the knee injury, 19 PPR points.
Right.
Then it came Marquise Brown and DeAndre Hopkins, and it got a little bit dicey. Obviously, quarterback situation, losing Kyler Murray as well. But if they put him back in that role and they feature him in that role,
For sure.
he's going to get you probably 15 PPR points.
If you tell me he's playing 50 snaps, I'm starting him. But I think there's a possibility that just like when I got excited about him against the Patriots in Week 14, and he played 4 snaps.
Yep, and I don't know what. I don't think it matters, to be honest, with quarterback is.
Right,
I think Colt McCoy, it's more about what Cliff Kingsbury wants to do with that position.
Yeah.
I think McCoy will feature that position the same way Murray featured that position, and obviously the way McSorley featured that position as well. The tight ends that we're looking at here to add a few names that could be helpful in desperate situations. Tyler Conklin back again with Mike White. Those numbers were good. Noah Fant scored a touchdown 3 of his last 4 games. Juwan Johnson not in the snow. Had scored a touchdown in 4 of his last 5 games. Jelani Woods, as we told you at the top of the show, whenever Granson has not played, his numbers have popped. And then if you want to buy into 3 touchdowns, Shane Zylstra scored 3 touchdowns last week for the Lions. Maybe that's something that they're looking at. You got to be pretty desperate, though, to trust him. In terms of Conklin, Heath, you trust Mike White to Conklin against Seattle, which is number 2 in fantasy points allowed to opposing tight ends.
Conklin is my favorite guy on this list for sure. It's a weird thing. I don't want to say tight ends deep. I definitely not. But there are now 12 tight ends that I feel okay starting. So I don't have any streamers that I have ranked as a starting tight end.
Agreed.
Conklin would be my favorite option. It's a good matchup. It should be 40-plus pass attempts. He's been better when the pass attempts have been up.
And in 3 starts with Mike White, he's had at least 7 targets. In 2 of them, again, good matchup, and the quarterback leans on him. Dave, you like Noah Fant the best based on our podcast conversation earlier. Again, the touchdowns have been there for him, but can you trust him if Tyler Lockett plays?
It's going to be harder. Certainly going to be harder, but you look at the Jets, they've allowed at least 11.5 half PPR fantasy points to a tight end in each of their past 3 games. So if
One of
there's
those
an
is a little
opportunity,
fluky, though.
Sure, but it doesn't. But the Brock Wright,
Yeah.
you don't think Noah Fant can do what Brock Wright can do?
He certainly could.
He could score a touchdown. I don't think he's going to rumble at 50 yards like Brock Wright did, but he's been involved in their red zone offense. Obviously, a lot easier to trust Fant if there is no Lockett. I think I'm still going to trust Fant over Conklin if Lockett plays because I know that CJ Uzomah is going to be a tight end that the Jets could employ on top of Conklin